Let's get some analysis now with Tom Packer. He's an honorary research fellow at UCL's Institute of the Americas and joins us live from Wingate in North Carolina. Tom, always good to have you on the News Hour. So this deal that Trump speaks of still needs to be signed off by both him and President Xi. But the U.S. leader seems quite optimistic. But is he jumping the gun here again, possibly on purpose?
I'm not quite sure how it would serve his interests. So he might be just being a bit there's a sort of huge, what you might call this reality distortion field with Trump. He takes this almost positive view of everything. So there might be an element of that happening. I mean, I think the truth is there's so much bad will between China and the United States, and there's so many different trade complications that even if this deal does get signed and sealed, which is kind of my working assumption, there'll still be endless complications and clashes down the line. It's sort of, not even really the beginning of the end. It's just part of what's going to be a continuing story of trade restrictions and removing them and putting them back on and so forth.
And what are some of those other complications that you speak of, not just with trade, because there's also a huge lack of trust now between the U.S. and China, not as if there wasn't that in previous administrations, but it seems to have worsened under Trump's leadership.
Well, I think the way Trump's imposed tariffs has obviously rattled the Chinese a great deal. In some ways, they've been relatively lucky, and so far as Trump has imposed tariffs on most of the rest of the world, so it's been a continuous story. The natural sort of sweet spot in US political terms has been for the US to take a tough line on China and try and sort of construct a protectionist bloc, particularly of the West, against China. And in a sense, the Chinese have been lucky that Trump has had his had a broader protectionist agenda that's kind of got in the way of putting in China. And I think the Chinese are being reasonably savvy how they manage this. They're trying not to have a direct clash with Trump because it's so much easier politically for Trump to have tariffs on China than it is to have tariffs on the UK or the EU or other countries that the US public and elites have a much more sympathetic view to. So I think at various points they've been too willing to get in a fight with Trump. I think they're being relatively careful now. And Trump is very interested in sort of quite small kind of trading, quote, wins. So if China can give those a few of him, they can potentially negotiate a better situation regarding the tariffs.
Tom, the U.S. has been accused of using bullying tactics here, obviously not just with China, but with almost every country around the world. But because of its power and its influence, is that forcing other countries, despite what they say publicly, to actually bow to Washington's demands or at least come to the negotiating table to find a solution that serves both of them?
I think as a general rule, I mean, obviously the US is very powerful. It's also what in political science you'd say it's not a unitary actor. That is, there are different powerful forces within the US. It's not just Trump, it's Congress, a lot of which is very dubious about this trade war, and the courts, which matter a great deal because Trump is using these legislation, giving the president the power to pass tariffs. And there are serious questions. Is that legislation constitutional? If it is, does it actually give him the power to impose these tariffs? He's already starting to have trouble in the courts. And I think he'll, to some degree, at least lose those and so be in a much weaker position to impose tariffs. I think as a general rule, the US has so much negotiating power. It does have the potential to do this. Having said that, Trump's priorities with China seem to be relatively minor things on fentanyl production, real earths. And I think China has done quite a good job of imposing, for example, these restrictions on raw earths, which can then be a win when they get removed, but aren't actually China giving up anything it had beforehand. So I think it's the kind of thing where the devil will be on the detail. But my suspicion is there will be more restrictions on both sides that will hurt both economies. But China won't fundamentally change their policies in a way that some other countries like Canada or the UK or even the EU, of course, a confederation of countries might. But it's very early days, so it depends a lot what ends up being agreed and if that agreement sticks.
Thank you very much for your analysis, as always, Tom Packer.